Going into No Way Home, I was skeptical. It seemed as though Marvel and Sony were continuing the trend of ruining Spider-Man movies by bloating them with content. Rumors leading up to the release had both Spider-Man, their girlfriends, their main villains, Daredevil, Mephisto, and then of course all of Holland's cast. However, when that first trailer came out, oh boy, I was feeling better, but I didn't want to get ahead of myself. I walked into the film cautiously optimistic. I obviously couldn't help myself from reaching pants-pissing levels of excitement. Spider-Man has been my favorite superhero since I was 5, when I got the Spider-Man pillow for the first time. Just so you know, I'm not a fake fan. But this love for Spider-Man has not blinded me in the past to the movie's flaws, and I tried my hardest to do the same for the latest Spidey adventure. I'm happy to say that even when ready to not let the hype cloud my judgment, anticipating at least one major critique of some kind, eager to see how this movie would play out while expecting some level of disappointment, I can't say that I ever was. This movie works. What makes it truly special, the reason No Way Home makes me so excited just thinking about it, is because it isn't just a great movie, but it's a great Spider-Man movie. That term is thrown around over the internet like it's a water balloon on a steamy summer day, but what does it mean? In other words, what does it mean to be Spider-Man? Well, I won't be as pretentious as to define what a universal character like Spider-Man means to everyone ever, but in my opinion, to be Spider-Man means to sacrifice. It means to care for others more than yourself. It means to always get back up, to endure life-altering consequences due to your own actions and still persevere. It means to be belittled, beaten, hated by the majority, the very people you save day in and day out, and to continue to do that saving because it's your responsibility to do so. Being Spider-Man, as simple as it sounds, is to always do and face the consequences of doing the right thing, no matter how much it hurts. But by saying No Way Home is a great Spider-Man movie, am I implying that the other Holland films weren't? Well, no, not exactly, but I have to say that this feels like the most Spider-Man movie of the bunch. Maybe it's just me, but the first two Holland films never felt like true Spidey adventures. They felt like other fun MCU superhero romps. Now, I am not a Holland hater. I don't mind the Iron Man stuff, and I think the movies aren't half bad, but they never satisfied that Spider-Man scratch in my brain. MCU Peter never felt like Peter. When I saw him on the big screen, I saw Tom Holland. When I saw that suit, I felt nothing behind it, only a CGI puppet that spouts the occasional one-liner. I'm not trying to be like High Top Films here and hate Holland until there's a spider-shaped hole in his chest, but the MCU films just didn't feel like Spider-Man to me, especially in relation to this one. One of the reasons being that Peter in the previous films faces consequences and stakes that are nowhere near as impactful as those in No Way Home. Now, I'm not saying he never had responsibilities or suffered for doing the right thing previously. In Homecoming, Peter wants to be an Avenger. He wants to be something more than your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. In pursuit of this goal, he loses his suit, beats the bad guy, and quits the dream of being an Avenger to accept his position as your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Boom. He sacrifices what he wants to do the right thing. That's Spider-Man, right? Well, yeah, but then all that is undone in Infinity War when he gets the suit he previously rejected on the principle of wanting to be Spider-Man. So not only does the progression from Homecoming go down the drain, but I would argue that Peter's arc in Homecoming isn't impactful because of its lack of true responsibility in comparison to No Way Home. In Homecoming, he's chasing a title. He doesn't hurt the lives of those he cares about. He doesn't face consequences further than losing a job position in a suit. It just isn't a very engaging arc or desire due to its low stakes that impacts Peter and nobody else. And again, it all just gets undone in Infinity War. It doesn't feel personal, it doesn't have heart, and that made me feel somewhat disconnected from this version of Peter. Although I think it's solid and does have at least a sense of responsibility and sacrifice, it doesn't have the tension and gravity required for a great Spider-Man story. Far From Home only picks up on Homecoming's mistakes. If you learn to be your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, then why does Peter want to go on a vacation? It's because he wants a break. The film establishes Peter as wanting to live a normal life while also existing in the shadow of Tony. This isn't half bad. A main component of Spider-Man's character is rising to the occasion, and Peter wanting to balance his two lives is a typical Spidey problem. However, the film quickly loses itself in a mismatch of tones and ideas, becoming a lighthearted romp one second and an emotional wrecking ball the next that never blended for me. This confusion in tone leads into perhaps my biggest problem with the film, the same issue with Homecoming and the reason No Way Home works for me as a Spider-Man movie. The consequences of Peter's actions aren't great enough. As a result of Peter not believing in himself to be the next Iron Man, he hands the glasses off to Mysterio. Okay, good. This makes the bad guy even more powerful and puts his friends in danger. But the thing is, yet again, this never felt personal. Happy saves Peter's friends. Peter and Mysterio's relationship didn't feel fleshed out enough to act as a strong emotional connection throughout the movie. And by the end of the film, he doesn't really face any consequences. He saves the day, gets with MJ, Aunt May is fine with him doing literally anything throughout the entire movie. He's able to afford this trip around the world, and ultimately, the entire adventure didn't feel like it had a lasting effect. I would argue this is the same for his arc. By the end of the film, he learns that, hey, he doesn't need to be Iron Man, he just needs to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Which was a conclusion he arrived at in the first movie. Even worse, this is only an action. He learns how to use his spider sense, so he's Spider-Man, right? Well, he didn't sacrifice anything to be Spider-Man. He didn't lose something he loved. He didn't do the right thing and face the consequences for doing so. Couple this with characters that feel somewhat underdeveloped or forced, like Nick Fury, Happy. Even the relationship between Peter and MJ didn't feel completely fleshed out to me. And you have a Spider-Man film that again lacks in personal stakes and sacrifice for the character. All of this made me feel like this isn't Peter Parker. This isn't a kid presented with crisis after crisis, whether unique to average Joes or superheroes, who sacrifices everything and gives it his all only to deal with the negative results. Tom Holland never felt like Spider-Man to me because he lacked essential traits of the character: lasting consequences, a sense of responsibility, generating the will to do the right thing from within and not from others, personal stakes, and problems that impact those he loves. MCU Spidey has the spectacle of Spider-Man, but none of the heart. In the previous Holland films, he learned how to act like Spider-Man, but in No Way Home, he chooses to become Spider-Man. No Way Home begins with Peter's identity being revealed to the world, ruining his life, and notably, those are the ones around him. Aunt May is put under scrutiny, and both MJ and Ned don't get into MIT simply for knowing Peter. This motivates him to ask Doctor Strange if he could make everyone forget who Spider-Man is. However, this manipulation of reality isn't good enough, as Peter tries to go back and shape the world into how he wants it, where everyone who knew he was Spider-Man would still know. Not to get all lame and technical, but this is fundamental storytelling. Characters and stories have an immoral want and a need they must accept, with another way of framing this being the lie the character believes in and the truth they must learn. In No Way Home, Peter's immoral want is to have the perfect life. His lie is that he can balance both the stresses of Spider-Man and Peter Parker while actually having it all work out. His need is to accept the role of Spider-Man, the truth being that for him, there is no way he can balance his double life, presenting him with a choice: pursue immoral desires or accept responsibility. Isn't this just quintessential Spider-Man? The balance of the two halves of Peter is a staple in the character's stories. But what makes this more impactful than the other films is how closely tied this desire is to true responsibility. In other movies, Peter becomes Spider-Man, but there is no tie to anyone else in his life. In No Way Home, Peter wants to help the lives of those he's ruined, while in Far From Home, he just wants a vacation. It's a much more intimate, relatable, and high-stakes desire because it involves people other than Peter. It simultaneously makes our protagonist seem selfish and caring, a dichotomy that is core to Spider-Man. Of course, this immoral desire causes other dimensions to be brought into their own, which I would say are some pretty big consequences for his actions. The duration following this shows Peter meeting his foes, which is where I would like to add a little tangent. Another reason this film works for me is because there is actual philosophical debate between the villains and Peter. All good villains are reflections of their heroes, usually being a version of the hero that follows their immoral desire to the extreme, which is why by the end of the film, all the villains, admittedly Lizard is pretty lackluster in this regard, represent selfishness. Electro wants all the power in the city for himself, Sandman wants to go home regardless of saving the others, and the Green Goblin tries to draw Peter closer to his desire by saying gods do not have to make choices. Green Goblin believes Peter should use his powers to achieve his selfish desires, the opposite of what Peter has to learn. The opposite of with great power comes great responsibility. But notably, this responsibility isn't a philosophy Peter holds throughout the story, clearly indicated by his belief that he can have the best of both worlds, and spoken in word when Peter first meets Norman. Keeping in line with his more selfish beliefs, Peter rejects Aunt May's notion of helping the villains instead of sending them back, saying that it's better for them if they're sent back to their own reality, to which May absolutely owns him by saying, better for them or better for you. Sorry, I can't use footage from the film yet, you just have to listen to my voice. Basically, Peter's beliefs are challenged in the second act, which sets him up for the midpoint in the third act, and again, these beliefs that are being challenged are fundamentally Spider-Man. It's not learning how to use a spider sense, it's not losing a costume. It's Peter learning that what it means to be Spider-Man is to help others no matter what. It's at this midpoint where Peter puts this belief into action. Typically in storytelling, the midpoint is when the hero sees their truth for the first time. Their change in desire reflects this change in belief, and the story flings into a new direction. No Way Home's midpoint is when Doctor Strange returns to the box, sorry, I don't know the name, sue me, and is about to send the villains back to their dimension. It is here where Peter is presented with another choice: commit to his immoral want by sending the villains back, thus living the perfect life at the sacrifice of others, or changing his beliefs by taking on the responsibility of helping those who need it. Selfishness or selflessness? The perfect life of balance or the imperfect life of Spider-Man? Not my problem, or with great power comes great responsibility. He chooses to help the villains by beating Doctor Strange and entering Happy's apartment. This new belief ingrained in him by Aunt May is affirmed when he actually does help Doc Ock, a critical part of any story to show that the character is making strides towards their truth. However, even more important is the character being punished for enabling this truth at the crisis in the fourth act, which comes in the form of the villains turning on Peter and the Green Goblin killing Aunt May, but not after she can stab that truth into Peter's mind one more time, that with great power comes great responsibility. This is peak Spider-Man. Being punished for trying to help others is fundamental to his character. Again, there are some great lines from Norman that attest to his opposing belief, such as when he says Peter's weakness is his morality, implying that he could have whatever he wanted as long as he shook himself free of his sense of righteousness that makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. He also states that his powers aren't a curse, but a gift. Again, this contradicts the very nature of Spider-Man. Peter suffers from getting bit by that spider. Look at every great Spider-Man Spider-Man story. Hell, look at Spider-Man 2 if you want. For Peter, his powers are a curse, but one he chooses to bear because of the very sense of morality ingrained in him by Aunt May and challenged by the Green Goblin. Naturally, Peter is drawn back into his desire, rejecting his new truth after being punished for enacting it. This is when the fellow Peters visit MCU Peter, where he states that this isn't his problem. Again, this is an issue of responsibility. There isn't a less Spider-Man-y set of words than, "it's not my problem." It is only through the other Peters where Holland's truth is not completely lost, and a principle of storytelling is present, that through the punishment at the crisis, it is unclear whether the hero will commit to their known lie or unknown truth. This decision comes in the 5th act of the film, where Peter almost succumbs to his want by nearly killing Green Goblin. He is stopped by Toby, a mentor figure that understands that being Spider-Man doesn't mean killing for revenge, using your powers to get what you want, but doing the right thing, no matter how great the sacrifice. Holland engages with this Spidey philosophy by saving Green Goblin rather than killing him, and making the ultimate sacrifice. In a brilliant moment of symmetry, Peter decides rather than getting the perfect life by undoing the consequences of being Spider-Man, to sacrifice everything he loves to save the universe. He says goodbye to his mentors, to MJ and Ned, to the world he knows and the one that knows him, and in that moment of sacrifice, Spider-Man is born. He further commits to the mantle when visiting MJ and Ned, the ones that no longer know Peter Parker. He anticipates telling them who he is, reminding them of their lives before the film, to become a trio once again, a trio that suffers because of Peter. The trio whose futures were ruined for knowing and being Spider-Man, and he can't do it. Peter recognizes their happiness, the dreams of his friends coming true because he isn't in their lives, and he leaves. It's the ultimate sacrifice, and that's why this movie works. Peter doesn't gain anything. He doesn't get with MJ and return to his normal life. He doesn't walk away unharmed only to be handed a swanky new suit later on. He ends this movie alone, broken, and having done the right thing. He ends this movie after being put through the ringer and beaten for making the morally correct decision, finally knowing the meaning of responsibility, knowing the meaning of sacrifice, knowing the meaning of Spider-Man. When MJ calls Peter's name, I didn't see Tom Holland. I saw Peter Parker. I saw a kid who's been through it all and would do it again if it means helping even one person. And when he put on that suit and took that final swing around a blistering New York, I saw a hero. I saw Spider-Man.